Hello everyone, Jo here with another video from Time for Tea Designs. Today's video is the edited version of our Facebook Live from Thursday evening, and in that video I made a card using one of the new stamp sets, the Hooray Hamsters. I absolutely love this set, and the great thing about it is the coordinating dies come with the addition of two slider mechanisms, one that fits a portrait sized card and the other a landscape style card. So here are all the images from the set that I've already stamped and coloured, just so that you can see what's included in that set. There are also some extra little accessories of a hat and a bow tie and some sesame seeds. So I'm going to use a few of the images from the set to make my card, and we are going to make a slider card in today's tutorial. I really love this effect. When I put this stamp set together, in my head I wanted those little hamsters to roll in their wheel, so I had to include that slider mechanism in the coordinating dies. So I'm just stamping out one of the little hamster images and the wheel itself, and then a few of the sesame seeds that we can use as accessories in our scene. I'm using my Memento Tuxedo black ink to stamp my images and some super smooth cardstock. This is the cardstock that we sell in our shop, and it's a great cardstock because it's also really suitable for doing your ink blending, which we'll be doing a little bit later on. I'm stamping some extra sesame seeds there just so that we've got enough for our scene building. And now I'm going to colour in my little hamster, and I'm using one of the hamsters that I coloured previously as a bit of a guide to the colour scheme that I wanted to use. I'm going to be using a little bit of grey for my card base, so I wanted my little hamster to be in shades of grey as well. So I started with my lightest colour of the toner grey, and then I'm just going to build up on that using the mid-tone and then my darkest tone, which is going to be the T5 in this instance. It's only a small image, so I don't want to make it too complicated, and there's no need for it to be too complicated because, like I say, the images are small, so just a little bit of shadowing detail to create some depth and dimension is all that's required. I'm going over each of those colours again, so I work back through those colours from darkest to lightest to blend those together, and then I'm just adding some pink to the cheeks and to the ears as well. For the belly, I'm going to use some grey shades of brown. So having looked through my Copic markers, I'm going to use the shades of E40 and E42 just to add a little bit of shading to the belly portion of our hamster. And I'm starting with some flicks just from the outside coming inwards, but leaving a really small gap of just white where the line is. This helps give the illusion of some shape to the body, and I will just blend that in with my blender pen around the edges and towards the middle as well, just to create a nice smooth blend. I'm going to use the same shades of the toner grey just to add a little bit of colour to my sesame seeds. So I'm just going to use those darker colours right in the centre of those seeds, starting with the palest. I think I just used the T3 and the T5 for this because, again, they are super small areas to cover, so there's no need for too much detail. For my hamster wheel, I wanted to use some shades of pink, but I didn't want them to be too bright, as I didn't want to take focus away from my background detail. So the colours that I've used were RV10 and RV23, and I'm just using a tiny bit of the RV23 to add a little bit of depth to this wheel, but nothing too complicated. I'm now going to die cut all of my elements. So I've added the coordinating dies to my sesame seeds and to my little hamster. Then when it comes to doing our wheel, one of the things that to note about this is that there isn't an open portion between the spokes, which means that it can be a little bit tricky to line up. So the trick that I've come up with is using a pencil to mark out the space where your spokes are. And if that's lined up perfectly so that there is an equal distance between each of those lines, then you know you've pretty much got it lined up central. So that's what we did. I used a bit of my washi tape to keep all of my dies in place, and then you can see here as I pull this apart that has created a perfect cut where all of those spokes should be. So now I've die cut all of my elements. I've just arranged them there for you to see. These are all of the elements that we'll be using on our card today. That little hamster is super cute, and we'll be just adding a little bit of detail to him. So I pop all of my my tiny bits in this little tray that I've got, just so that I can keep them all safe and I don't lose them. And then I'm going to use my Jelly Roll pen to add some highlights and some little dots where I believe whiskers would be. And then I'm using my black glaze pen to add a little bit of shine to those eyes. The next stage is to work on our background. So I'm using one of the new cover plate dies that we've just released. This one is the Hooray cover plate die, and it cuts an A6 size card blank. So it's really tough to see at the moment on the screen, but there is a little dotty wave line on each edge, each of the longer edges of our cardstock. But I'm going to mask off part of our card blank so that I can create a little bit of a floor. And in my head, I'd imagined making the inside of a hamster cage. So to create the illusion of the floor of the cage, I'm going to be using straw-like colours or sawdust-like colours. So I start with some of my scattered straw, and I'm using one of our beautiful blender brushes to apply ink to the bottom part of my card base. Just using a microfiber cloth there to rub off some of the excess ink, and then using some of my dried marigold, I'm going to build up some of that colour just to make it a little bit more interesting. This ink is a really lovely colour and it blends really beautifully with the scattered straw. So I'm happy with the way that this is developing, but I feel like it still needs a little bit of something extra to make it a little bit more sawdust like. So I'm going to turn to my tea dye distress ink. I'm going to add this to the very bottom of our floor and then just around the edges of that heavy doodle memo tape that we've used to mask off the rest of our card base. So now we can remove that and then move that down so that it covers the floor that we've just done, because we're now going to create the rest of our background. And I'm going to use our Diamonds Are Forever stencil, which is part of the new release. And this is a really versatile stencil, and I think I'll be using this an awful lot. But I turned it around so that the diamonds were a little bit more elongated. And again, in my head, I'm picturing this as almost the bars of a hamster cage. I'm using some of my milled lavender distress ink to fill in those portions of the stencil, and I'm just using that really lightly because I want to create sort of a blurred background, a little bit like taking a picture and focusing on our hamster and everything else in the background being a little bit out of focus. So this is the idea, is that the background will be a little bit more muted than what's in our foreground, which is going to be our hamster, who is going to be the star of our card. So now that's completed, I can reveal the areas that we've ink blended, and I think that looked really nice. The colour scheme worked really well together. It's a really pretty effect with those diamonds in the background, and our flooring has come out a really nice colour as well. So now it's on to our sentiment. So within the stamp set, there are a number of different sentiments that you can use. So the ones that we decided on as a group during the Facebook Live was hooray, and that's how we roll. I really like the sentiment of that's how we roll, and also the it's hammy time. I just love any sentiment that's a bit of a pun, and so these ones really appeal to me. I'm using my stamping platform just to line up each of my sentiments, and I'm using the wheel that we're going to be applying to our slider mechanism, just to make sure that there will be enough room for that to slide in between our two sentiments. So I don't want them to be obscured or covered up by that slider element. I'm stamping my sentiment with VersaFine Onyx Black ink. This is my preferred ink for sentiments because it does give a really good, strong finish to those stamped images. I've chosen some of our koala cardstock to cover my card blank, so I'm just going to cut that to size now using my mini trimmer. I'm going to be using an A6 card blank, and I'm going to be using it on a landscape orientation so that our slider mechanism can go all the way across. And I'm going to trim down the background that we've just created ever so slightly. So like I say, that cover plate die is sized to be exactly an A6 card blank size, so we'll cover all of your card base if you want it to, but I just want a tiny little bit of that koala coloured cardstock to peek out of the around the side. So I'm just trimming down each side by a tiny little bit, just so that that will frame our background. So now I'm going to just attach that koala cardstock to our card base using some of my liquid glue. So applying that liberally all over the back. And liquid glue is so good for this because it means you've got that little bit of wiggle room to make sure that you've lined that up perfectly straight. And now we've got a good basis for our scene. So now to these lovely sliders. So I'm just separating those from each other. And like I say, we're using the longer one today because that allows our little hamster to roll the full length of our card. And I'm making sure that when our little wheel is in the middle of our slider mechanism, it's not going to cover those sentiments like I mentioned before. So once I'm happy that I position that in the right place, again, just double checking that that's all going to work. Then I'm going to pop that in my die cutting machine and cut that out. So that we've got a nice seamless background as well. One thing that's really important to do, or one thing that I really find is important for me to do, is to add that little strip that we've cut out with our slider directly to our background. So I'm just lining that up. I popped it in upside down to begin with, so corrected myself. Flip that over, and then I've stuck that directly to my background. So now once we've created our slider mechanism and we've attached the rest of our background, you won't see any of that grey card behind the slider, which is what we don't want to see. That we want to create the illusion of seamless background. So you can see I've just attached my little hamster to his wheel. That gives us a little bit more of a surface area to attach our slider mechanism. And I'm popped him in place so that I can now attach my penny. So I've got a little container that I keep lots of little useful bits in, and I have a few pennies in there for when I'm creating these kind of cards. The penny is the perfect size. If you're not from the UK, I'm sure you have similar sized coins that are also of a similar weight, because the weight is quite important as well, as is the type of foam pad that you use to attach your penny. If you use a circular shaped one like we're using here, then your slider, as you can see here, it will spin rather than just slide from side to side. If you use a square foam pad, then your image will just slide from side to side. So that's great for images that you don't want to turn upside down, but we want to give the illusion that our hamster is spinning in his wheel. So we want it to turn round and round. So now that that's in place, I can now apply some of my shaker tape to the back. And again, this is an important step because you want your slider mechanism to roll freely. So that means you don't want to create any obstacles or obstructions. And if you haven't put enough depth of foam tape, then that might limit the movement. So I've doubled up my shaker tape by folding it in half, and that gives me double the thickness, and that will mean then that my penny slider is free to move really easily. So I'm just going to pop this all over the back of my card panel, because I don't want there to be any sort of any dips or bowing in the card. I want it to be a nice sturdy structure, because it's going to be handled a fair bit, because it is so cute. I imagine it's going to be picked up and played with quite a lot. So I'm removing some of that backing tape. Now I've got plenty of it on the back there, so that I can position it onto the front of my card. So lining that up with the panel that's already on there, and you can see that that works really, really well. So I'm so happy with the way that this has turned out. It looks really, really cute. So the finishing touch is just to add some of those sesame seeds that we cut out and coloured earlier on, just so that it adds a little bit of interest to the floor of this hamster's cage. So he's been throwing his sesame seeds all over his cage, and they're dotted about in the foreground. So just a bit of liquid glue to add these to the front. A few of the single ones just dotted about around that sentiment, and then I felt just one more just in the middle there, and that just makes this complete. And none of those are interfering with the mechanism itself, so that will continue to slide backwards and forwards really, really well. So that's our card complete. I really hope you've enjoyed the tutorial today. There is a slowed down version of the mechanism in action to come, which really shows it ever so well. So I'll let you watch that before I come back. How cute is that to see the little guy spinning? I love these cards. They're so much fun to make and so much fun to play with. I really hope you enjoyed the tutorial today. If you did, then please do like and subscribe to our channel, and we'll see you again with another video real soon. Thank you. Bye bye now.